So, continuing on with reviewing various adaptations of Dune. I know I said in the last one that next up I was going to do the miniseries. I lied. The reason for that is I had assumed the miniseries was going to be available streaming somewhere, and at present it does not appear to be. I mean, if I could, maybe if I torrented, I could find it, but I don't do that. Not that I'm too good for it. I'm too lazy for that kind of thing. But I have a DVD copy on its way. In any case, while I'm waiting for that, guess what's out now? Denis Villeneuve and his take on Dune. So, let's talk about it. First things up front, this is half the book. And that is both to its advantage and also to its disadvantage. And I'll get into that a little bit. I know that's flat out spoilers. See, the thing is, like, I've been talking without a lot of consideration of spoilers when I've been reviewing the book and the David Lynch movie, and probably when I do the miniseries, it'll be the same thing. I'm going to be slightly more cautious here because this is a brand new movie, and even though it's a story I've been talking about openly, I'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers. So, things up front. Looks real good. That's not a surprise. Denis Villeneuve makes amazing looking movies. So that's not in any way a shock, but it does look really good. And there are a lot of things that he does that really bring into sharp focus where Lynch's adaptation failed. So this is also pretty slowly paced because Lynch's adaptation, while cutting a lot, felt very slow. Like scenes would progress really slowly. And that is also the case here, but it works here because there's still a sense of build and energy to things. They may be moving slowly, but they are moving. A lot of Lynch's film honestly just felt static. And honestly, I think a really good example to that is the fact that here on Arrakis, when they're in the desert, with only a couple of exceptions, there's a lot of emphasis on the wind. I'm not talking like it's always a storm, but the sand is moving. It's being blown around them. You know, they have these wrappings around their head and they're blowing in the breeze. And it makes the planet seem less hospitable because there's this cutting wind on top of everything else. Dune in the Lynch version always just was very still. It didn't feel alive, and it didn't feel as dangerous as this does just by using wind and making use of that. I would also say that the actors fare a lot better here. And again, it's a shame because Lynch had really good actors in his movie, but they didn't know what to do with this. They've done a pretty solid job here of adapting the way that the characters speak just enough that it does not come across as super stilted, which is what happened in the Lynch version. Here, while it's still very formalized talking, they still use people's first and last names, and it's pretty rare for anyone to be referred to by just their first name, basically unless it's Paul. So it's, everyone gets referred to by their full names, full titles. It is a very formalized way of speaking, and it maintains that, but it eases back on it just enough. There's also an interesting little addition of basically of sign language. I don't think it's ALS. I don't think it's American Sign Language, but some sort of hand moves to indicate things that are used at a couple of points for characters to communicate to each other without speaking, or to help relay information about what these characters know. I mean, to each other, but more importantly to the audience, because we get captions when the hand movements get used. And the thing is that made me realize, like, that's what they're doing instead of having us listen into their brains like Lynch tried to do. And it's a neat little workaround and a heck of a lot more practical. And that works really well too. So I think the other really interesting here is the framing. So like Lynch's version, it doesn't open the same way because the book opens immediately with Paul and leaps pretty much right away into the Bene Gesserit trial that he has with his hand in the box. This has other stuff happen before that, but the framing is really interesting, particularly in light of the fact that what the director has said he wants to do is 3 movies. The second movie would be the second half of Dune, and then the third movie would be Dune Messiah. Now, I haven't read Dune Messiah, but enough people, when I did my review of the book of Dune, brought up some of the things that happen in Dune Messiah that are kind of correctives or debunkings to some of the things that I talked about that went on in Dune. And if he wants to do all 3, the framing and how this thing opens is actually potentially fascinating if he gets to do all 3, and shows long-term planning if it all comes to fruition. What I mean by that is we actually open with the Fremen on Arrakis. They're the point of view that we get at the beginning. So we are brought to sympathize with them initially, and we bring in Chani right away. So that's where we start from. And from their perspective, the Harkonnens are oppressors. And Chani has this voiceover line, the Harkonnens are leaving. Who will be our next oppressor? Cut to Paul. That, if he gets to make all 3 of these, that's some bold framing. I dig it. Now, if he doesn't get to make all 3 of these, so like I said, the fact that this is only the first half of the book is both to its benefit and its detriment. On the one hand, it gives this story the room it needs to breathe. There's still a fair amount of stuff that's cut, but you don't feel the absence of it so much, and it never feels rushed. It is taking the time so that the weight of events is there. Everything is given its proper amount of time. The characters, the events, the settings, and like the settings are really well depicted. So it's taking the time needed to give it the weight that it wants to have. So that's definitely where it is to its advantage. Where it's not to its advantage is the thing about cutting a book like Dune in half is there isn't a clean point to do that. I mean, like, the book is divided into 4 sections if you want to count the appendices, which I don't, but 3 sections, and theoretically, maybe you could cut off one of them, but like none of those are a good clean breaking point. It's not like Lord of the Rings, which, yes, was originally just 1 book that was released as 3, but even that way, like, the point at which they broke each one of those, there is a little mini climax to really serve as a way to wrap up the chapter and the story for now. This doesn't really have it. And like, it's not like they picked the wrong stopping point. They picked, I think, about as good a stopping point as they were going to get. But it's not a stopping point. And it's not satisfying. In my mind, especially when I know he intends and wants to make future movies, but with it not being a certainty, this is honestly, the way this ends is only about a half step better than just cutting to black and saying to be continued. It's not quite at that level, but it can see that level without needing binoculars. So I'm going to start getting into spoilers because I want to talk about a lot more of the specifics. So overall, it's a good movie. If it does get sequels, it could be the first part of a great series of movies. If it ends up being standalone, it is very incomplete. So that's sort of where I'm at with this. Having said that, now I'm just going to talk about whatever. So let's deal with the ending since I brought that up. So they basically end shortly after Paul and Jessica, his mother, hook up with the Fremen. And so the closest thing we get to a climax is Paul having his knife fight with Jamis, which, I mean, it's an action beat, I suppose, but it's a knife fight against a guy that we met 5 minutes ago. And when I said this is only slightly better than To Be Continued, I mean, Chani has the line, "This is only the beginning." And she might as well have turned to camera and said, "Won't you come back for part 2?" But like I said, there isn't really a good place in the book to stop midpoint. There just isn't. There just isn't a decent climax anywhere in the middle of the book other than the I suppose the sacking of Arakeen and the fall of House Atreides, except you can't end there because that's too much of a downer. You have to end it on a sense of like, oh no, we got places to go, and there's some sense of hope for these characters. So it doesn't really have a proper climax, and it just kind of stops. It feels like the first part of a 2-part miniseries. It feels like, well, I definitely need to see the rest. We'll see if it happens. I hope it does, because this is quite good, and I think did take a couple of cues from the Lynch movie, specifically the fact that they do have the Baron flying again. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, if I was misreading the book. My understanding was that the suspenders things, not like suspenders, but like these gravity things, they just helped him walk. They didn't fly him. The flying thing was a Lynch thing. And here he's not zooming all over the place the way that he was in the Lynch movie. Oh God. But like, he is flying flat out, like, okay. And the Baron overall is, he's definitely closer to the book. He's much more subdued. But honestly, he was kind of fun in the Lynch movie. But he is definitely much more book accurate. Everybody's book accurate. But also the actors feel a lot more comfortable, as I said, and so they bring a lot more personality and just charisma to the part. Especially people like Oscar Isaac and especially someone like Jason Momoa are injecting a lot more personality into these characters than they got in the previous adaptation. I don't really have anything to say about the fact that they made Dr. Kynes a woman. That's just a thing they did. It doesn't really affect anything either way. It makes the character at least visually more distinct than a lot of the other people that she was around. There's that, but it doesn't seem like anything making a deal over. I don't know if people have, but culture and the discourse, the way that it is, who knows? But it doesn't really have an impact. It's a thing that they did. Okay, cool. I do feel like a lot of the knife fighting with the shields, they communicate early on the idea of, slow with the knife gets you through the shield, quick gets stopped by it. And they tried to like have this sort of visual signifier that like the shield goes red when it's being penetrated. And sometimes that works. Like when Dr. Yue hits the Duke with the dart, and this dart kind of like, it's almost like it's drilling slowly through the shield. There's a lot of tension in that, and that works. But the fight scenes, honestly, I don't know if it's the way that they were choreographed or the way that they were shot or what, but the fight scenes do not communicate the idea of fast defense, slow attack. The attacks look as fast as everything else happening. It's just they're just being shown like, and the shield went red, so clearly he penetrated the shield. Like, yeah, but he stabbed them as fast as he was doing anything else. Like, what? It's, and like, I appreciate that trying to do that is super difficult. Trying to visually communicate that kind of fighting, I wouldn't know how to do it. But at the same time, they just kind of pretend as if they are doing it, but they aren't. The film overall is kind of actioned up, which is actually incredibly typical. Lord of the Rings is actually, again, a good point of comparison for something like this, because all the action beats that take place in this are in the book, but they're really quick in the book. They are glossed over super fast in like 1-2 pages of description. Whereas here, things like the assault on House Atreides by the Harkonnens, that goes on for a while. The rescue of the spice miners from the sandworm, that is actioned up a little bit, because instead of the carryall just never showing up, it shows up and like, oh no, it doesn't work. Which, like, They do actually kind of justify it, like, oh, well, it's like it was sabotage that left us bad equipment. Okay, so you didn't just do it for the sake of making it tenser. It's tense because there's a worm coming. So, they still got some storytelling use out of that, but that's the kind of ways in which it's been made more cinematic, is expanding out the action stuff a bit more, which is just typically how this thing is done, because action scenes in books are actually really hard to do elaborately. It just is. There aren't a lot of writers who can pull it off, and most don't bother trying. Whereas films have the potential to do action very, very well. So they tend to emphasize it more. So that's just a standard adaptation shift as far as I'm concerned. And at least not to my notice, did they inject new action scenes in. They just lingered a heck of a lot longer on stuff. But it's good, but it is not a complete movie-going experience. It is only half the story, and it feels like only half the story. It doesn't feel like a Fellowship of the Ring. It feels like The Matrix Reloaded, or it feels like, Pick Your Poison, Mockingjay, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, whatever, those books cut in half, and it feels like a part one. But they're not calling it a part one. They're just calling it Dune. But it's only half a Dune. It's a good half. Again, I hope we get the second half. I wonder what they'll call it. Because if they're going to call the third one Dune Messiah, like the book, what would you call the second one? You wouldn't just call it Dune 2. Dune Muad'Dib? Maybe? I don't know. But other than that, like, as far as the story itself goes, you can see my review of the original book, because pretty much all my thoughts there apply, because it's done pretty faithfully. So anything that I said about the general stuff there also applies here. So, yeah. I would say, granted, I haven't gotten to, it's actually a rewatch for me to do the miniseries. I have seen it before, but it's been a while. But unless that really does shockingly well, I think I'm comfortable in saying this is the best adaptation that Dune has gotten. I hope they do the rest of it, because it just kind of stops. Dune, what'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. This is part of a commissioned review, and if you want to commission me to do stuff, Patreon's how you do it. You can support me without commissioning stuff as well. Tons of tiers of support. All of the help is appreciated, but no big pressure on that. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break. And look at you, sticking around through the credits. I appreciate that. Well, you know what? You're about to be treated to a whole ton of names going by on the screen, but there's a few of them that I want to give special attention to. My special thanks to Bookworm, Jared Boyce, MJ, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Kaylin Schwartz, Edelin, Hannah Acker, Robin Moore, Ross Schultz, and Shay Lagurle. If you want to hear me mispronounce your name, check out the reward tiers on the Patreon. But for right now, thanks so much.